Hello and welcome to another Total Education Centre lecture. My name is Bruce Pattinson and today I'll be giving you the second lecture in the Hamlet series, and I'm going to talk about what people have called Hamlet's procrastination or Hamlet's delay in killing Claudius in the play. Don't forget to visit our website totaleducationcentre.com.au. There's a lecture there by Lewis Mitchell on Hamlet, and you'll find our European correspondent works very effectively through Hamlet and all those issues, and that will help you with your studies. There are also lecture notes there for you to download. Don't forget to also, if you like this lecture and find it useful, give us a bit of a like on the like button downstairs. Apparently that helps our ratings somewhat. I don't know about these things. Now let's talk about the delay now I've had that little ad break. Some critics suggest that the delay isn't really an issue at all in the play, and that basically it's a false issue and people spend too much time talking about Hamlet's procrastination. I'm going to spend some time talking about it today so that you can decide for yourself whether you think the delay is an issue or the delay is just part of the play. Hamlet can't, I suppose, immediately go down and strike Claudius and kill him without, I imagine, thinking it through, and I think that's partly some examples. And that's a context issue, and if you watched the first lecture we talked about the nature of Shakespearean tragedy, and if you haven't watched that lecture, you should go back and watch that before you look at this, because I'm going to allude to some of the ideas that were presented in that lecture, in this lecture, to help you work through the idea of the delay or Hamlet's procrastination and why he doesn't act. And part of that was that the idea of the concept of a hero in modern terms is very different from what a hero was, I suppose, in those contextual times. And we expect our heroes now, and we get that from the movies, I suppose, especially those American blockbuster movies where the hero is a man of complete action who doesn't really think through the issue, who just goes out and kills people and solves the problem. That wasn't the train of thought in Shakespearean and Elizabethan times, and certainly there's been a lot of development over time for that, and different audiences respond now differently to Hamlet. Let's go back and have a look at what some of those issues are in Hamlet and why he doesn't physically act. There are certainly critics who see Hamlet as totally responsible for the delay and that there are no external factors whatsoever. I tend not to think that, and I think there are several good reasons why he doesn't act, and I suppose the external reasons why he doesn't act are sort of his fault in many ways, although if he acts immediately, of course we have no play and there's no tragedy and there's no real angst and values and ideas in the play, and I think Shakespeare needs to make that out, and that's one reason why I think it doesn't happen that way. Certainly there doesn't seem to be any external reason why Hamlet can't act, and I found it even way back when I did Hamlet at school. I didn't really like Hamlet as a character because I think he works his way through all sorts of excuses not to act when really there are no valid reasons. And I think if we look at it very carefully, there are certainly no external reasons. I think all the reasons are the internals for Hamlet, and that's what makes him such an interesting character, and I'll explain myself more clearly now. Alright, from the beginning to the end of the play, Hamlet, for example, never makes any slightest reference to any external difficulty that he would have in doing it. And I'll explain that very clearly by referencing the play. There is no real reason. For example, he never alludes to anybody. He says he can obey the ghost, he will go and get revenge, and then he doesn't move. He says, for example, "Sith I have cause and will and strength and means to do," but he doesn't do that. Again, we see the other two people who need revenge, Laertes and Fortinbras. They go out and they act immediately, and they certainly contribute action to the play, whereas Hamlet is the talker, and I think that we see that sort of contrast very nicely in the play. And I think Shakespeare does that deliberately. Laertes, for example, Hamlet says, "Oh, I can't really kill a king, he's got guards." Well, Laertes manages to raise the people up and go to Claudius. Why can't Hamlet do that when we in fact know that Hamlet is certainly far more popular and certainly has more princely charm than Laertes does? Why can't he do that too? Again, that's one reason. Hamlet does not plan the play scene as such to make the king betray his guilt to court. He planned to convince himself that the king's guilty. So there's that, oh, I believe the ghost and I've said I'm going to do it, but I don't think I will go and do it. I need to prove to myself that Claudius is guilty. I need to see it on his face, and he certainly does so when that play occurs. And he says, it's very clear, and we can look for, in Act 2, Scene 2, line 625 and further on, where he says, if this occulted guilt do not himself uncannily in one speech, it is a damned ghost that we have seen. So we need to look at that basically and go back to that context. And Hamlet spends a lot of time trying to convince himself of what's happening and why he should be doing it. Again, Hamlet never says, okay, let's go out and we'll go take the king to court. We'll get some public justice. We'll do it legally. We'll get our revenge that way. He always plans to kill him, and he does think about killing him, and certainly he may have killed him if he hadn't come across Claudius praying, for example, where he says, oh, I can't kill him now because he's praying. So it must be, we must assume, because all those external difficulties are really not issues for Hamlet. He says, I can do it, but he doesn't do it because of all those things. Why then? It must be an internal struggle. And we see the internal struggle in the soliloquies, and later in one of the other lectures I'm going to talk about the soliloquies and the effect of soliloquies when I discuss the language issues in the play. So I'll leave that till later, but you need to think about the internal difficulty that he has in coming to terms with what he needs to do and that sense of revenge. And I think it's not anything from outside that stops him, it's Hamlet himself that stops him. And this is what makes Hamlet the most interesting character and probably Shakespeare's most famous character, and certainly the most performed Shakespearean, the one people love seeing on stage. And I think it's the internal struggle in Hamlet, and he carries out that same internal struggle that we ourselves might have, and I alluded to that in the first lecture on Hamlet, where we talk about that our hero or the main character needs to be someone like us who would have that internal struggle, and we need to work out how and what we can do with that internal struggle and why Hamlet has that internal struggle. It's certainly, I don't think, necessarily a moral scruple that he has. He says, I can do it, and certainly he is a swordsman and he can act. So it's more convincing himself to do it, convincing himself that it is the right thing to do. He's an honourable man, he needs to make sure that he's got that focus very clear in what he's saying. I'd like to read you some analysis, some historical analysis of what critics have said about this problem and this issue. And why does Hamlet delay it? And it's been historically a very difficult question for people. There are many critics who've certainly weighed in on this, and A.C. Bradley certainly weighs in on it in a big way, and there are other critics, in patterns of Shakespeare and all those sorts of terms, Rubner's patterns of Shakespeare, he comments on the delay. But we can see that Hamlet, first of all, may genuinely doubt the word of the ghost. This is where the context of the ghost comes in. I'll talk about the ghost as a character in another lecture. But he certainly, and I've alluded to that previously. So then why doesn't he kill the king after the play scene when the truth of the ghost story has been proved? Some think that his declared wish to kill Claudius when he's engaged in some less pious activity than prayer is only an excuse for the unexpected revulsion from killing. And indeed, many people also see this as a mere excuse and problems with Hamlet's earlier doubts about the ghost. But Hamlet hasn't a revulsion against killing, even in cold blood. His killing of Polonius is an admittedly impulsive act, but his plot to kill Rosencrantz and Guildenstern is premeditated, and he seems to take certainly a Machiavellian delight in getting them caught in the trap that the king had set for him. There's also other reasons that critics mention. Another one is the theory that Hamlet has an unexpressed revulsion against killing is related to another which sees him as exquisitely sensitive being, too used to contemplation to be able to undertake a consistent plan of action, and of course constitutionally droopy and indecisive. These views have certainly created some reactions against those views, of course, and I think that the strength of the context and the strength of the arguments against them is quite good. These views, as I've said, Some critics see Hamlet as a savage, cruel and coarse and egocentric character. Another explanation of why he doesn't act if the prince's delay in killing Claudius is if they had killed the king at once, there would have been no play. And several critics have pointed that out very clearly. And however little we care about the plot and motivation, we must surely concede that such an interpretation brands Hamlet as a dramatic failure, as indeed some critics think it is. Now, I certainly don't hold that view. I think Hamlet's one of the great Shakespearean plays, but many critics have said that there are weaknesses in it, and you might want to contemplate that and think about those. The other critics suggest that Shakespeare has made a brave but unsuccessful attempt to turn an innately barbarous genre, i.e. revenge tragedy, into a mature and sophisticated one. T.S. Eliot is the best example of this, and you'll find that on the internet. If you read T.S. Eliot's lecture on Hamlet, you'll find that he took that view, but it certainly wasn't originated by him. He took his ideas from other people and other critics and built on that. Another explanation of Hamlet's delay in taking revenge is that he feels that the time is out of joint. He has been born to put it right, yet killing Claudius won't solve anything for the prince, since his contempt for his mother and uncle is extended to himself and indeed the whole world. In other words, in modern terms, is Hamlet so cynical that he just can't be bothered doing it because it's not really going to affect anything and it's not going to change anything anyway. His questioning of all basic assumptions about life must find resolution, or at least be quieted, before he can undertake the deed with any faith in its righteous or usefulness. Now, I think that's, and I repeat that phrase because personally for me, I think that's the one that solves the problem and talks about the issue. And if you understand Hamlet very clearly as a character, I think that you would agree that that is very important in the context of the play and what we talked about in that first lecture about revenge tragedy. His questioning of all basic assumptions about life must find resolution, or at least be quieted, before he can undertake the deed with any faith in its righteousness or usefulness. And I think that is the approach that we need to take when we talk about Hamlet. I mean, I can't say for sure that I really think Hamlet's, one of the great, wonderful Shakespearean characters. I think he's very interesting. I didn't like him when I was a student, and probably I like him more now as a character. But he does that. I think he does question so much about the basic assumptions of life, and that's what makes him an interesting character, and that's why audiences have always related to Hamlet, because he does raise those questions about morality, about ethics, about the world, and about people in the world and the way people act and how he should act in that situation. And I think that's what gives him that sense of honour and gives him that sense of nobility. And I think that's the approach that I will take in studying Hamlet in this modern context as a reader and as an audience. And I think if you take that, it opens up the play to a whole new understanding. Don't forget, you can think about those other ideas that I mentioned through this lecture about why he doesn't act. And you can find those on the internet, and I'll put a few reading references at the back of this lecture to help you understand what's going on there. I hope this has helped you somewhat in working out about Hamlet, the delay. I'll certainly go back and talk about Hamlet's character in a more concrete sense, but I thought we'd cover that early in the piece so people can get it in their heads and start thinking about it. The next lecture we'll probably talk about, and I think we'll discuss thematic concerns and the values that go with those thematic concerns and what Shakespeare's trying to portray. I think these two lectures you should have learnt a little bit and developed some ideas about Hamlet as a play and about Hamlet as a character. And I think we'll build on that now and talk about a little bit, we'll try and combine those contexts and values in the next few lectures. I'm Bruce Pattinson. I'm speaking on behalf of the Total Education Centre. Don't forget to visit our website at totaleducationcentre.com.au. You'll find there a lecture on Hamlet and some notes that might assist you even further with your studies. I hope you've enjoyed this lecture. Don't forget, if you give us a like down the bottom, I'd really appreciate that. Please send comments and questions. We're always willing to respond to those. And if you like our website, subscribe, because we're going to provide lots of interesting lectures on English issues on the way through. Thank you. Goodbye.